Yes, welcome on into Locked on Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked on Auburn your first listen every single day, recording right after our open viewing window. Mike G of the War Report hanging out with us, and we'll talk about the guy who I think impressed me the most, at least physically, but we got to start with quarterbacks, and they went in the order we all thought they would. Peyton Thorne, Holden Geriner, Hank Brown, then Walker White. It's easy to see that age and experience is kind of what they went with here.
Yeah, like as you start spring practice, Zach, you're going to start with the experience, which is what we saw out there today.
Right.
The young guys are trying to catch up. You know, we talked with Walker White earlier this week. He talked about absorbing the information in the system and how much it was on him at this level. So that's what we saw out there today. You know, the young guys trying to catch up to what's going on out on the field, and the experienced guys kind of leading the way and showing those guys the ropes.
Yeah, so that's the order they went with, at least to start. And then after that, it seemed almost random at that point. And there were times where there'd be two quarterbacks going at the same time as far as throwing to all these different pass catchers over the field. So early first day, really not a whole lot to look at there. But as far as guys who they were throwing to, Cam Coleman got his first reps as an Auburn Tiger in practice. He is so large, he is so big, and he moves so well.
Yes, Cam Coleman is the prototypical receiver that Hugh Freeze is looking for in this system.
Right.
He spoke repeatedly about catch radius. Well, Cam Coleman has the catch radius that Hugh Freeze is looking for. So he was on display out there along with the other guys today, kind of showing what they can do. Again, it's just basics. This is the first day of practice, so those guys are just learning how to move out there and getting their wheels under them.
And just as far as guys moving, I mean, it seems like the roster is getting bigger. And as far as like just the eye test, like you see guys like Caleb Burton out there, and he just feels like a larger receiver. And he's one of the smaller guys as far as receiver goes on the roster, right? And then you saw Sam Jackson, the fifth, out there. You saw Rivaldo Fairweather, running a lot of out routes with a lot of these guys. Rico Walker is actually a guy I highlighted in my write-up at auburndaily.com, the Maryland tight end transfer. Really good size. These tight ends, man, this is just a different build of tight end than we've seen at Auburn. And it's clear that Hugh Freeze has a type here.
He does have a type. So Rivaldo Fairweather will obviously get most of the time out there. But
as he should. Yeah.
I'm looking behind him. Luke Deal had 0 catches in 2023.
Insane.
0 catches. And while he is a reliable guy, he whiffed on a lot of blocks last year, and Michael Riley-Ducker is actually the best blocker of the group. He showed flashes of potential catching the ball last year from the backups. He's going to be looking to move up the depth chart. I'm going to be watching him to see if he can make a move up the depth chart this spring at tight end.
And I just think if you're an eligible receiver in this offense, you want the defense to have to respect you to be a threat in the passing game. And now, I don't think Rico Walker's a guy that's going to make a huge impact this year, but you can start to see like the roster panning out where, one, you get depth, but then also like you see a plan for the future for a lot of these guys. And so Micah Riley, Rico Walker both have the opportunity to be the guy after Rivaldo Fairweather this year. Or, hey, for whatever reason, outside wide receiver doesn't pan out, maybe you feel more comfortable in some situations putting Rivaldo at outside wide receiver if you need to. And then also having Micah Riley kind of be an option underneath there. Both those guys physically, really, really impressive to me today.
Yeah, they were impressive physically. We noted with some of the players that the offseason training regimen was effective this year.
Right.
Those guys felt good about where they were physically coming into this spring camp. And it was amazing to go out there today and see the results of that process, Zach.
As far as other guys who caught passes, who else stood out to you?
I have my eye on Robert Lewis, the Georgia State transfer.
Sure.
So the guys have raved about his speed and quickness, not only top end, but off the line. He's going to be an experienced guy that, may be able to fill some time if the young guys take some time to come along. I know a lot of people are going to be looking for Cam Coleman to get on the field early, but behind him, Perry Thompson may be a little bit more physically ready in terms of strength and weight coming in, but he's not here this spring. So I would look at Robert. I was looking at Robert Lewis out there and thinking, I'm
glad that you bring him up because I didn't really notice him, and I don't think it's anything that he did. I just didn't watch the receivers a whole lot. I spent a lot of time watching the D-line and the O-line, and we'll talk about them in a moment. But Yeah, he's the guy that Auburn needs to pan out.
Yes.
And even from a reputation standpoint, because it's like, how many times can you make the pitch to transfer receivers if, they kind of do what the transfer receivers, the older transfer receivers from a year ago did?
Yeah.
So I think he's important not only for this year, but as far as like the reputation of, what Auburn can do with that position in the portal.
Yeah, we know that they wanted to prioritize the guys from high school. They wanted them to feel like they were the focus.
Yeah.
But also, you got to bring those guys along at a rate that makes sense. Robert Lewis gives you some time maybe to produce in the passing game and give your young guys who are clearly the future some time to come along.
Yeah, I think so. So I'm glad you bring up Robert Lewis because I didn't really see him a whole lot. I saw Sam Jackson the fifth more.
Yes. The Cal QB.
The Cal QB. He did have a drop, but there were a lot of drops today, which isn't super great, but it's also the first day of camp. I'm not really reading into it yet.
Zach, Heather Dinich would be very disappointed in what she saw today.
Well, she ended up being kind of right. So
Yeah.
I don't know if we can poke at her yet or not. I don't know.
First day of camp, like I said, I think that those guys they're just getting started this spring, so we'll see.
What'd you think of the quarterback throws? Once again, it's on air. There's no defense. I don't even think they're not even a full pads, right? But what'd you think of the quarterbacks? I mean, all of them I thought threw pretty solid balls consistently.
Yeah, nothing stood out as negative.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
which is a good thing.
Nothing stood out as negative. What we saw out there was a room full of pure passers. Hear me out.
Sure.
A QB room full of pure passers, and that's got to be exciting for Auburn fans to see. Again, you mentioned Holden and Thorne going out first, and then Brown and White behind them.
Sure.
Look, the young guys look good. Hank Brown still looks like the guy that was dropping dimes in the bowl game to me. So, again, similarly to what we talked about, in the tight end room with Micah Riley trying to come from behind to catch up to the two experienced guys in front of him, Hank Brown is probably the most realistic that's, in terms of young guys that can make a move up the depth chart this spring because he got a chance to show it in game. Hugh Freeze is going to give him a chance to show it this spring.
The best throw I saw all day was Hank Brown. It was like a corner route, an out-breaking route to Grant Hidalgo, the tight end of all folks. Right on the sideline, it was a great catch by Hidalgo there. But once again, I didn't spend a whole lot of time watching the quarterbacks and the pass catchers, but for what I saw, that was the best throw and catch of the day.
Yeah, White had a pretty good deep ball that I saw. And,
okay.
Yeah, and
who caught it? Do you remember?
Yes, he was throwing to Michael Riley. It was a pretty good deep ball that he had down the field. And again, these big targets are going to serve these quarterbacks well. I think in the fall. So. Again, showing the most consistency in spring camp is the best way to move up Hugh Freeze's depth chart. He talked about what he looks for in a leader. That's consistency at practice, accuracy, attention to detail, right? And that vocal leadership that he values so much.
Yep, absolutely. All right, there was one guy that physically impressed me the most. You said it to me too, unsolicited, so we're on the same page here. That's coming up right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is the best place to buy tickets for whether it's sports, whether it's the theater, whether it's stand-up comedy. It doesn't matter. If you need a ticket to it, Game Time has you covered. And right now, you can use promo code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first purchase. Download the free Game Time app. It's very easy to use, very user-friendly. You can buy a ticket and see like the view from your seat in like 3 touches. It's great. Game Time, free app. Use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. Mike G.
Yes.
The guy that stood out to me, it was very quick into the media window. And in fact, it's why I spent maybe too much time watching the defensive line. But oh my goodness, Malik Blockton does not look like a true freshman.
My sources tell me that they were experimenting with some new things. And one of those things was that Captain America remold machine. Malik Blockton, people got in it, and he came out looking like a monster.
It's insane.
Yeah, again, we heard so much about the offseason, strength and conditioning program.
Right.
It is paying dividends for Auburn football right now. You train to prevent injury first and foremost and to play at a high level. Malik Blockton has transformed his body this spring, and it's going to be interesting to see how he could put that to use.
Yeah, and I mean, we heard nothing but incredible, not just good or like passable things, but we heard nothing but incredible things.
Yes.
About Malik Blockton during the bowl practices. And now you can see why. I mean, the biggest thing that holds freshmen back for playing on the offensive line or the defensive line is the physical nature of it. Is their body ready enough?
Yes.
That dude can play. That dude can play in the SEC right now, and he's got several months until the season starts.
Yeah, again, the summer workouts are going to be key for him. Again,
Sure.
continuing that process. So for those who don't know how it goes, again, you've got about 8 weeks before spring practice starts to get your body
Sure.
into shape. Then you got to ease off the weightlifting a little bit while you're out there practicing.
Right.
Once they get into summer workouts, that's your next window to, again, put that last bit of muscle on, drop some weight, do whatever the coaches are looking for you to do physically,
Yep.
and then go into fall camp ready to go. Malik Blockton has got a jump start on everybody, and I think it's exciting for him.
Yeah, other defensive linemen that stood out to me, Gage Keys,
Yes.
the transfer from Kansas. Longer frame than I was expecting. Longer frame than the film that we've seen from him at Kansas. I could see the upside of him as a pass rusher. Longer arms than I expected. Longer torso. You can see the appeal and why they wanted him to be a part of this roster. Like, as far as the eye test goes, like, I saw him and I'm like, why is Austin Keys with the defensive lineman? I'm like, is this something
Another
weird?
Keys,
And it's like,
yeah.
oh, that's Gage Keys.
Yes.
So that just shows, like, I think he looks pretty lean. I think he looks pretty long. Interested to see how they use him in a pass rushing capacity.
I didn't get a chance to look at Gage, but I'll tell you, I did notice that Jason Jones looks like he's come along as well, too.
Our guy.
Always a
Let's
big
go.
guy, right? But again, he's taken the next step physically as well, too. I was very impressed with what I saw from the defensive line today, Zach. Again, they're doing a great job with that group, and they look ready to go.
Yeah, eye test, the D-line looked better than I thought today, honestly. Trill Carter, the transfer from Texas, was consistently behind Jason Jones in drills, and I had him penciled in as kind of the backup to Jason Jones at that nose tackle spot. It makes sense. He's built. Trill Carter is, as far as like low center of mass. You can see how it would be very hard to move him off the ball.
Yeah, that low center of gravity is so important to have
Stocky.
in this game.
Yeah.
He's just a stocky guy that I think is going to be hard to move. If he gets the technique down and, he works with his hands well, he's going to be a star here.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. And even if he's not, even if he can kind of have some sort of impact to just be a solid 5th, 6th, 7th defensive lineman, I think that's still a win for Auburn, especially if some of these freshmen step up, like a Malik Blockton. Didn't really notice T.J. Lindsey today. Did you?
I did not see
And
TJ,
I didn't see Amaris either. Now that I think about it.
No, I didn't see
So
him either.
yeah,
They
just
had
didn't
us kind
notice
of
him.
on the side there. It was hard to see some of
It
those
was
guys.
different setup there because they're usually farther over, the defensive
Yes.
linemen are, than where they were today. Offensive line, I thought was interesting. So we didn't get to see like a full like starting 5, which is different, but whatever. They did kind of keep a lot of guys in pairs, and all the pairs really made sense. So we had 73 is Percy Lewis and Dylan Wade, which
Yes.
makes sense. Percy Lewis, by the way, is a massive human being. Doesn't feel fair. Doesn't feel fair for him to be that big. And then we had Seth Wilfred and E.J. Harris as a tandem that rotated in and out. Dylan Senda and Clay Whedon, which is interesting because that says Clay Whedon's a tackle.
Yes.
So that's interesting. And then Jeremiah Wright and Favor Edwin. That one was also interesting. And then we saw Jeremiah Wright and Xavier Miller, which also makes sense. So based on that, I still think your starters from left to right are Percy Lewis, Dylan Wade, Connor Liu, Jeremiah Wright, and Xavier Miller.
Yeah.
Xavier Miller physically looks the part too, man. I was talking with somebody else while we were watching. It's just like he's so big, but moves so well. And so we saw kind of like how raw he was this time a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
He's a different player now than he was last spring.
Yeah, I had my eyes on Dylan Wade and Jeremiah Wright. Those are going to
Okay.
be the experienced guys that you're going to look to take the next step this spring. Obviously, Connor Liu just burst onto the scene last year. He looks physically the part right now as well, too. So you got to replace a couple pieces on that offensive line, but they're going to be so key to making sure that this group of pure passers has time to actually go back and pass the ball. So offensive line will have a lot to do with that. 33% of Auburn's rush attempts came from the quarterback position. They took the air out of the football last year, and they passed the ball at a 61 to 39% ratio. That's 61% run, 39% pass. Hugh Freeze is going to be looking to move that along this year, and that line is going to play a big part in that.
It's going to have to. And I think it'll be better than a year ago, which is a little weird to say because I love Gunnar Britton, and I think Gunnar Britton was so good and such an unsung hero in last year's offense. But the way that they've moved guys around, and I think Percy Lewis is just going to be such a big addition too, as far as size and as far as impact. But the tackles from last year to who we think the tackles will be this year with Lewis and Miller, I just think it's going to be a night and day difference as far as pass protection because I think those two guys have it.
Yeah.
And also just as far as paving the way in the running game.
Look, Payne Thorne, he ran for 600 something yards last season. But if you end up having to go with Hank Brown, he's not going to give you 600 yards on the ground. So what you're talking about with pass protection,
I mean, Thorne's the only guy that you really can see is okay, he can get over 500 yards rushing in a season.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe Walker. Maybe.
But we're not expecting to see him. So if it's Gurner or it's Hank Brown,
baby goat.
Yeah, you got to take that out of the equation, and pass protection has to improve. So we'll continue to monitor those guys as the spring goes along to see how they're doing because they're going to need to step their game up if you got to go with the other two quarterbacks.
Yeah. I'm just so pleasantly pleased with just the eye test. And it's spring. It's the first day of spring. They're not even in full pads. But you can see the roster forming into what Hugh Freeze wants it to.
Yes.
You can see the future of, okay, I can see how this can be a championship roster in 1 or 2 seasons. I think they're close, Mike. I really, really do. And obviously we all thought that before spring, but it's nice to see it. When we're standing right next to these guys.
Well, they've got to get that pass-run ratio closer to 40 to 48, 52.
Scheme and all that, and they'll work that in, obviously, throughout spring. But just physically, this team looks different than it did 2 years ago or even last year when Freeze took over.
Yeah, this is going to be an instrumental year, Zach, in terms of moving this roster more towards what they want it to be because 2025 is going to be the year that it's going to have to start to look like it's coming together. So you take this season to move these guys physically, move your scheme a little bit, and then, maybe you're almost there at the end of the season.
Yep. All right, overall takeaways and expectations for spring moving forward. We discuss in just a moment right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. It's America's #1 sportsbook, and want to encourage everybody to head over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. They've got a bunch of lines, including Auburn 7.5 wins. Have I gotten your opinion on this?
We have. I'm on the under.
You're on the under.
I'm on the
That's
under.
right. That's right. That wasn't as big of a deal as I thought it was going to be when you said that. That's right. But yeah, if you're like, no, Mike G, you're wrong. Auburn's totally going to win 8 or more games in 2024. Or if you agree with them, head over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn right now. Any $5 winning bet will get you $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. All right, as we look ahead now to spring, because they've got a few practices, and then they're off for a week with spring break. We'll hear from Hugh Freeze on Thursday. What do you think the biggest question that Hugh Freeze can address in the first week of spring realistically can be?
What you have to do is you got to narrow down those quarterback reps pretty quickly, right? So you cannot spend the whole spring splitting reps evenly. We heard Harsin talk about this. Freeze talked about it, last spring.
Sure.
You've got to get it from 4 to 3 and from 3 to 2 pretty quickly so you can have an effective spring game and know where everybody stands heading into summer workouts. So I think that's going to be the thing that's going to be asked the most, and people are going to want to know, hey, you promised an open competition after the bowl game. What does that look like?
Do you think he will be asked, hey, is this really a quarterback battle?
Yes, 100%. I may be the one to ask it. So if I could place a bet on whether that question will be asked.
Yes. Do you think what do you think he'll say?
I think that he's going to say that it's open. I think that he's going to be true to his word.
You have to, right?
Yeah.
You have to at this point.
And I think that he'll show that. Again, you've got to continue to develop the experience that's already in the room.
Sure.
And because you may have to turn to those guys But also, you've got to make the other guys feel like it is an open competition, that they do have a chance to overcome that experience if they're the most consistent in practice. Because until you've had the on-field experience, that's all you have to go off to say that, hey, is Walker White really outplaying Payton Thorne? Is Holden Geriner, right? We heard reports last fall that Holden was doing the best in camp at some points, and then we heard Robbie was doing the best in camp, and then we heard Thorne was doing the best in camp. Well, it didn't turn out so well on the field for any of them, but, they've got to figure out what that math looks like this spring and start to move this thing forward. He promised that he was a QB developer, so fans are going to want to see that.
Yeah, and I think this can be really the first opportunity where we can see that, because Payton didn't really go from, he wasn't here last spring, so Freeze didn't really have a chance or a chunk of time to develop him. Holden Geriner, I guess, is really the only guy where it's like, can you take a step forward?
Right.
This is now, he's played for multiple head coaches here at Auburn now, different system, and we'll see if he still sticks around and it goes through the season. But I think this is a great opportunity for these quarterbacks, because I think Hugh Freeze is going to spend a lot of time with all of them, and I think they're all going to grow as passers and grow as decision makers. That's really what it comes down to. We saw Payton Thorne make the throws a year ago. It's just when the lights come on, what do you do?
Yeah. I think that your challenge with Thorne is, how do you get what you see in practice, if you're seeing it in practice, to translate to the field on Saturdays? Now, they took a lot of responsibility, as they should have, for how things turned out.
Yeah.
So if you're going to start Thorne, I think that they've got to take a step forward as a coaching staff as well and try to get these guys there. So we'll see if they can do that. Is
there a position group in your mind, maybe with the exception of the defensive line, that hasn't improved over the last year? Because I think losing Marcus Harris is a big deal, and I think losing Elijah McAllister is a big deal. And some depth. Even guys like Lawrence Johnson and Messiah Nasili Kite, and losing those guys, I don't think they're fully done in the process of replacing those guys. I think they'll add more guys in this next portal after spring. But as far as any other position group outside of the defensive front, did Auburn improve everywhere else?
I'm not sure that the tight end room improved.
Interesting.
Yeah, the same guys back, right? And it's not to say that there's not production there, but if you're asking, did they improve?
Minus Fromm. You lost Fromm.
Yeah, right? Did they improve losing Fromm? I'm not sure they did. I'm going to keep an eye on that this spring to see where those guys are at.
So bringing the guy back in Brendan Frazier that seemed to be trending in the right direction, Rivaldo Fairweather, going out and getting Rico Walker, you don't think the upside is higher now in the tight end room?
Maybe. But yeah, again, if I had to pick one.
If you had to pick one.
That would be it.
Got it. So yeah, that does it for today's show. Be sure to like the video and subscribe. But Mike G, how can people check out everything that you have going on?
Check us out over at the War Report on YouTube. We got lots of great things. Yes. We're dropping an interview with Walker White here that you're definitely not going to want to miss.
On Friday?
Yeah. So don't miss that. We sat down with that young man.
I've been privy to some of this. It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be an amazing interview. Give fans an introduction into who that man is as a young man. And check us out on YouTube. Subscribe. Become a patron.
Yes, that does it for today's edition of the show. We'll see you tomorrow. This has been Locked On Auburn.